Hello there. I'm Alice Twemlow, Chair of the MFA and Design Criticism Department here at the School of Visual Arts. Thank you. And thanks a lot for coming out tonight on this extremely wet and windy day. We hope you'll stay for some drinks afterwards to warm up. We have just one more lecture in our fall series, and one that I'm really looking forward to. It's going to be an intimate conversation with Murray Moss, the founder of the pretty infamous Moss Gallery and Store. I'm going to be talking to him about both the greatest hits at Moss, but probably more about his thoughts on the design world as he embarks on the new consulting venture, Moss Bureau. And the lecture is going to be followed by our holiday drinks party, so do come along to that. You know to visit our website for videos of any of these lectures that you may have missed earlier in the series. And speaking of our website, we've just launched a new one. And it's to coincide with the publication of a brochure. There are copies of it in the other room, which you can look at over drinks afterwards, which is devoted to the stories of graduates of this program who are out there working in the interrelated fields of design research, editing, writing, curation, education, and management. And it was a really fun process to put it together. I sent a questionnaire out to a selection of the graduates, about 11 of them. And it's really in their own words that we hear about how they found the program, what they learned here, what they went on to do, and really how much Decrit still figures in their lives. So yes, it's a sales brochure, but one that the people who've received so far actually said they read through and enjoyed. So I encourage you to take a peek. Just to introduce you to three of them. This is Amelie, who, when she came to the program, was already an accomplished journalist from Vienna, and she had this dream of becoming a design curator. And luckily, we teach curating here, and so after 2 months after she graduated from the program, she was able to get the position of curator at the Vitra Design Museum in Germany, which she's very happy about. And this is Will, who was a business manager who wanted to write a book on biology and design and get it published, and did. And he got it published by the publishing company Thames and Hudson in the UK and at MoMA here in New York. And for the last example, Alan Rapp, who wanted to get away from book publishing, he actually left the West Coast and a job as a book editor at Chronicle Books for a chance to write and teach here in New York. So these are just some of the stories, and there are many more in the brochure which you can take a look at and on the website. And if you're interested in applying to the program or know someone who might be, definitely check out the video of our open house if you didn't make it. There was a really incredible, moving, off-the-cuff speech by the designer Milton Glaser, which I would recommend you to take a look at. And all the details are on our website. All right, that's the spiel out of the way. Let's move on to the main attraction. Now, one of the basic premises underlying the Decrit program is the importance of distribution. It's all very well, I tell the students again and again, doing hours of reporting and deep research, developing a strong argument, and writing it all up in beautifully wrought prose. If no one sees what you've written, if no one gets to be persuaded by your work, then you might as well have written it in your journal. We're constantly testing out different means by which we might connect with our audiences. And as part of the core curriculum, we teach blogging, video essays, podcasting, exhibition curation, conference organization. And when we get to applied thesis project, we delve into audio tours, pop-up stores, book clubs, progressive dinner parties, iPhone apps, and more. So we're really looking at different ways to like I say, reach out and connect to our audiences. We also run a class on how to develop a book with Karen Stein as a former editor at Phaidon Books. We publish some of our own chapbooks through Lulu. A few weeks ago, some of our students pitched their book ideas to the commissioning editor of Thames and Hudson, that company I mentioned before. And tomorrow, David Bloom, who runs the Amazon Kindle Singles program, will be in to talk to the second years. So as you can see, just from that few examples, we look at books from many angles as possible. But I think we're going to get a whole new, fresh one here tonight. Steve Almond is the author of 10 books of fiction and non-fiction. His memoir, Candyfreak, was a New York Times bestseller. His short stories have appeared in the Best American and Pushcart anthologies. His most recent collection, God Bless America, was shortlisted for the Story Prize, among others. He's an amazing writer. He's also a pretty good publisher. In the last few years, Steve has been publishing his own books through his own imprint, DIY or Die. Great title, right? And elsewhere in collaboration with the designer Brian Stauffer, and apparently loving it. He'll be telling us why and how, and as a special treat, debuting some new DIY books just for us. So, please welcome Steve Almond. Oh, the image will look very tiny.
Yes, but up there it will look big. Okay, good. Hi. Hi, guys. So here's my lecture. Here it is. Okay? I'm going to try to expand on these points a little bit. And you can ask whatever questions you want. You're welcome to ask during my lecture or afterwards. The first thing to think about, which I suppose you probably have given some thought to, is the relationship between the writer and a publishing house. When I was getting my MFA in the 90s, listening to horrible alternative music, I just thought, well, books are made in New York, and some mysterious set of bad parents, after enough trying, approves your book, and or you have to find an agent first, and then you get to the editors, or the agent has lunch with the editors. Some mysterious New York thing happens, and suddenly your book is bought by a publisher, and it gets reviewed in the New York Times, and it's a bestseller. Actually, first there's an auction, and then it gets bought for millions of dollars, and it immediately gets optioned by James Franco, I guess, who wants to turn it into a video game, and it's very lucrative. But the process is something that happens in New York City, and the writer's role is to kind of sit in his or her garret and not screw it up and be grateful. And that is more or less sort of how it worked for me on a much lower level without any financial reward. But, you know, I put out a book of stories, and I put out a couple of nonfiction books, another book of stories, and so forth. And it was all with publishers who were New York publishers. Algonquin had an office in North Carolina as well. But it just didn't occur to me at that point that there was any other way for books to get made. But it did occur to me that the relationship I had with the publishers that I was lucky enough to get was pretty unnatural. It was essentially an arranged marriage. It was an arranged marriage between an artist and a corporation. That's what the publishing industry is. It is a set of companies engaged in the benign practice, in fact, I would say the culturally enriching practice of publishing books, but they are also corporations. And by the law of being corporations, I recognize they're people and everything, but they are people who are essentially, the bottom line is their operating template. And that just naturally caused a lot of friction, because the artist has their agenda and the corporation has their agenda, and the artist's agenda is to make beautiful art, and the corporation's agenda is what? To make a profit. That's what they're there for. That, at the end of the day, that's what a corporation is for. And sometimes there's a Venn diagram that's quite lovely, and there's a lot of overlap, and beautiful books make lots of money. But the corporation's priority is always to figure out, how can we sell this book as a commodity? And that's fine when you're talking about something that feels like a commodity, like a piece of electronics or a bar of soap. But when it's a book, that, to me, the role that it plays in the lives of people who are readers, it's not really a commodity. It's an artifact. It's a piece of art. It's an object. And so I was constantly finding myself getting into hassles with publishers because I wanted to do a particular thing, or they wanted me to do a particular thing that just didn't make sense to me intuitively, artistically. I thought, that's just a crappy idea. And of course, as a writer, you're just thinking, oh my God, I finally got a publisher, let me not screw this up, and biting your tongue a lot. But at a certain point, after I'd moved sort of from smaller presses to Random House and had the experience of having a couple of books published with Random House, and coming down to New York City and going up to the big top of the skyscraper and going, wow, this is the heart of New York publishing power or something, I just thought, as grateful as I was to have them publish a couple of books, these are not my people. This is not how I want to be spending my time and energy in the world. And I remember the sort of moment that this really hit home. I was talking with an editor, and I was pitching her on another book that I really wanted to make. It was a book I'd been thinking about for a long time, and in some ways had written most of it, at least in my head. One half of the book would be shorts, which I love, short stories, a couple hundred words to maybe 1,000 words tops, most of them around 500 words. And the other side of the book would be a set of very short essays, a page long, about the psychological and emotional barriers that keep people from doing good creative work, especially literary work. And this book was fully formed in my head. I knew that I wanted to write it. I knew that I wanted it to be a little book in size. I wanted it to be small. And I wanted it to be sort of like Strunk and White for freaks. And I knew that I wanted it also to be read from both directions. I had the fantasy that people would pick up this book and just put it in their pockets, like Rilke's Letters or Catcher in the Rye. I wanted it to be a physically small book. And I remember explaining this to this nice editor up there on the millionth floor of the Random House building, and just going, you know, this is great. This is a book that should be sort of designed at young people. It's kind of a gateway drug into reading, and it will be very easy to read and very quick to read and innovatively designed, blah, 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 giving my whole spiel rather too ardently. And I could just see that it was just her eyes just were dead fish eyes. They were just like, there is no money in the person speaking with me. There is no money to be had in his beautiful, fucked up idea. And it occurred to me, why am I barking up this tree? Why am I doing this anyway? Why am I trying to sell somebody on a project that if she did want to do it, she would fundamentally want it different, changed, you know, denatured? This was probably 3 or 4 years ago, and over the years, when I first started, you know, publishing books or putting books into the world, over those 10 years, the actual paradigm of technology had really switched or changed the terms of how books were made. Technology, I feel, has mostly had a deleterious effect on people's creativity and their moral imaginations. I'm sorry to say that, but you all have devices, and I think they make you a little less human, a little less present in the moment. However, technology has also done something quite beautiful. It has democratized the means of production. This happened years ago in the music industry. You can now make a beautiful record if you have the right software and you're a good songwriter and you have the instruments, and there you are in your bedroom making beautiful music. That didn't used to be the case. You used to have to, I don't know, rent out a music studio from a guy with a Coke spoon necklace. That was just how it was. You did not have the resources yourself to make a record. But that has changed, that started changing probably 15 or 20 years ago. And about, I would say 10 years ago, or 5 years ago especially, it became apparent that it is possible for any of you tomorrow, frankly, to make a book. I'm not going to say it's a great book necessarily, but the means of production exist for you to print a book on your own. And this occurred to me because essentially I told a friend of mine, yeah, I really want to make this little book, but I don't think I want to I don't want to have an arranged marriage with a corporation. I just want to do it myself. But I don't know how I would go about doing that. He said, oh, there's all these places online. I said, I know, but I always feel sold. You know they're always upselling you. You know you're getting sold. You're an American. You know when that's happening. And when you go on those websites, you're getting sold. Because a traditional publisher publishes 50 books a year and hopes to sell 10,000 of them. That's right. That's how they make their money. A self-publisher, it's just the opposite. They publish 50,000 books a year, and they'll make their money up front. But I knew that I wanted to do this project, and my friend said, well, why don't you just go to the machine over in Harvard Square that makes books, at the Harvard bookstore? And I was like, whoa, what do you mean? There's a machine in Harvard Square that makes books? Tell me more. The other thing that I did was I got in touch with my friend Brian Stauffer. I don't know, does anybody know who that is? I'm sorry you don't. He does New Yorker covers. I think the last New York Times book review last week was one of his illustrations. He's a big deal, I guess, in the design world. He's certainly way too big a deal to work with me. I'm kind of a cult author at best. But we worked together in the 90s and had made passionate love, and I took photos. And so now he's kind of stuck working with me. I sent him these essays. I wrote these essays, and I sent him the stories, and I said, do you think you could come up with a design for this book? Would you be willing to? And he read them and liked them enough to say sure, and that's when he sent me this image. Actually, yeah, this is the original image that Brian sent me. The moment I got this on my computer, I said, done. That's a no-brainer. That's exactly what I had in mind, with one exception. One exception. In perhaps the only documented instance of subtlety in my life, I say, you know, I love the nurse, I love the hypodermic needle, but the dildo feels a little on the nose for me. And he said, you know, I think you're actually right about that. And so we went to that image. A whip. Much better. Much better. And you can see in the original iteration here, we were still trying to figure out what was this book going to look like. And he went to this when he changed the images. He went to a flush left. And look, I don't know that much about design, but I know what I think looks cool, which I think is kind of how most people operate. And I thought, I like it centered. Let's go back to centered for whatever reason. The minute he sent me this image, and he also did the interior design of the book, which I thought was astonishing and just beautiful. I called up the Harvard bookstore and I said, well, I would like to make a book. And the woman said, okay, well, do you have a PDF? And I said, well, I don't know what that is, but I'll find out. And sure enough, Brian did have a PDF. And he sent it to the Harvard bookstore, and she said, yeah, we got your PDF. Why don't you come over on Thursday, and we can talk about it. I said, okay. Or she just said, come over Thursday. I live 2 subway stops away from the Harvard bookstore. So I went over there. I thought we were going to have a discussion, talk about the process. You have to understand, I was used to waiting a year to 18 months between when I turn in a manuscript and when it actually becomes a book on the world. I don't remember a lot of what's in the book. You go to a reading and go, what the, I can't even believe I wrote that sentence. And though there is some back and forth and copy editing and so forth, there's really, my sense of how a book gets made is you just wait forever for the book to actually be a physical object in the world. So I went over there intending to talk with this woman, and she said, well, are you ready? And I said, yeah. And she just pressed a button. Lasers started going red, stuff and ink was being sprayed from somewhere, and it's scrolling around, and it's like the expressive book machine looks like a giant Xerox, I guess, basically. And out pops 4 minutes later a book. This book popped out. It was still wet. It was sticky. It was like a baby. I wanted to swaddle it. And I'm trying to get across to you how fucking crazy that seemed to me. Like, I suddenly got it. This is the means of production being democratized. You have a book, you have an image, you have a design, it's in a PDF, this book gets made. Whoa, one button. So then I just went fucking crazy. I mean, I thought that was so amazing. I thought, well, the other thing that I got tired of with publishers is they always can say no. You have an idea and it just seems too impractical or difficult, and they've got a bunch of overhead and distributors and all this overhead that they have to worry about, and so they say no a lot. You know, like a book 2 directions, reading a book 2 directions, that just seemed beyond. But it's actually quite fun and easy to make that book, it turns out, as long as you have really low overhead, which I did. My overhead was nothing, basically. It was time and energy and effort and Brian's talent. So I'd always wanted, I remember, again, back in the Pleistocene era, there was a band called The Police, and they put out this album called Synchronicity. Somebody in this room is old enough to have heard of Synchronicity. Thank you. But I remember that it had 3 different versions, and you could choose which color scheme you wanted. And I always just thought that was just cool, that the book as an artifact could also be something of a Rorschach. So I asked Brian, hey Brian, would you be willing to make other cover images? And I had an image in mind in particular, which was the image that Brian had made for my first book, My Life in Heavy Metal, a book of stories that I published with Grove. And I had begged Brian back then, that was probably 15 years ago, to make an image because I thought he understood my work, and I thought the image he made was absolutely beautiful. It was so beautiful I got a print of it, and it's hanging in my office. And I've looked at it every day thinking, how in God's name did Grove say no to this image? It's such a beautiful image. It's the perfect image for the book. Let me see if that's the next image. There it is, the one on the right. She has needles coming out of her. So My Life in Heavy Metal is a bunch of very, very sexually charged stories, and they were really about the suffering of desire. They were about the way in which men especially, but women too, throw their bodies before their hearts, and it explodes. And the image that he came up with, you can't see how rich it is, but was so startling. That's what was hanging on my wall. I said, Brian, could we use that image? I would like to make another cover for This Won't Take But a Minute, Honey. And he said, sure, yeah, go, have at it. And then, because he got excited about it, he even agreed to make another image. There's a story in the collection, one of the first short story, which is about Hitler. It's about his skull, specifically, oddly and darkly. And so he sent me that image one day, and I was like, holy moly, can we do that? He said, sure. Then we got, and he did the other side, which I think is, again, I don't know anything about design. I just know that this guy was killing me with how beautiful the images were, and they really resonated with the work. We were having a discussion. He reads the work. He's a great designer, but I think he's also a serious artist and reader, and he understood the vibe of the work that I was doing, and I think these covers completely nailed them. So that's the final version. Actually, then Steve, the non-designer, got the brilliant idea that the skull itself wasn't good enough. I said, what about putting a clock in the eye, man? It'd be like Dolly. I just got ornate. And it was a bad idea. You got to, I suggested it, and for each one of these images, Brian and I exchanged a whole bunch of emails to try to say, well, what do you have in mind, and what looks good? And so we tried that, and then realized, no, it's better when it's just the stark image. We had such a good time doing that I immediately thought, well, that was a lot of fun to make these books with Brian. And because I do a lot of speaking and a lot of teaching, it became apparent that people really like these books. And part of the reason I think they like these books is that they're not available anywhere else. A book signifies itself as a commodity because it looks a particular way. It usually has an ISBN. You know what that is? The barcode, right? That's what tells you this is a commodity. That's how the man tracks you, basically. And so I was quite intentional about saying to Brian and sort of saying to myself, well, I don't want it to have an ISBN. I don't want it to be in the Library of Congress, or I don't care if it's in the Library of Congress. And I also don't want it to have any price on it. I don't want it to have any of the traditional signifiers that make the book as an art object into a commodity. And I don't even really care where it's available. In fact, I don't want it available electronically. I don't want it available on Amazon. I don't want it available in Barnes & Noble. I want, and this is very much in contrast to the traditional philosophy that publishers naturally have. They want a book to be multi-platform, wide distribution, worldwide distribution, get it on as many different formats as you can. My approach was actually, I have had enough of that. I would like to go to what I think of as the drug dealer model. So that's what these books are. They are the drug dealer model. You buy them from me in person for cash, and then we get high. That's it. Or drunk in this case. But part of the reason for this, it's not just me being contrarian. Part of the reason is because when I would go see, like one of my favorite musicians, he would do a concert, and this is part of, I think, where this idea of doing these books with Brian, sort of what inspired me. He would do a concert, and then he would immediately, because the means of production exist, make a copy of that concert. And I would always stand in line and get one and go, oh my God, it was so great when he played that song, and I'm so glad he played that other, you know. I wanted to capture the evening. I wanted to capture some of the energy of the human gathering when a bunch of people are in the same room. The thing that makes it feel more like an artifact that commemorates a human gathering and less like a commodity that signifies a commercial transaction. So it's not just because I'm kind of lazy and hate dealing with big companies. It also has to do with how I want these books to be viewed, which is as art objects. Now, it takes me a lot of time and money to print them and to make them, and Brian gets his cut, and Doctors Without Borders gets their cut, so I charge money for them. I think that's right. Artists should be paid for their art. It's not the primary reason they do it, but they need to keep fed and keep their family fed and so forth. But as much as I can, the idea is I would like it to be an in-person transaction. You can get them from the Harvard bookstore, but I would say 95 to 98% of the books that I sell are just in person. And when people say, oh my gracious, I really want to get that book that you, I always just say, I'm sorry, I can't, I don't stuff them in envelopes. It's in person. I like that because I love the idea that I kind of know at least a little bit, or at least have met everybody who gets the book. I don't know why. It just feels like a more personal way of doing business. And that's what I think of books as. They're very personal objects. My favorite books mean a lot to me. They're, I don't know, there's a little bit of, they have a certain kind of human mojo to them that a lot of other objects that are just much more practical don't. So it was very clear to me that I wanted to do another one of these books with Brian. And because I do a lot of political writing, I get a lot of hate mail, and a tremendous amount of hate mail. And I wanted to do this book. It occurred to me about a year after I started making these other ones called Letters from People Who Hate Me, which was really literally just letters from people who hate me and my responses to those letters. Really insanely kind of angry letters that to me felt like very important documents. They speak to the way in which a significant and very culturally powerful faction of the country constructs reality, in which if you write something that strikes them as too liberal, they don't just say, I disagree with you respectfully, they say, I disagree with you and your daughter looks like a maggot and I'm going to come kill you. It's sort of the unfiltered Fox News id of the right of this country, the proto-fascist part of this country. But I felt like these letters that these mostly men, some women, would send me were very moving documents in their own way. They did reflect the way that people really feel in their hearts, not the cleaned up version that you get like on Fox, for instance, where it's all kind of this unctuous innuendo. These are people who are just flat out, I fucking hate myself and I'm going to project it all onto you. So I thought, I really want to make this book, and Brian and I talked about it. I just had this image of a mouth exploding with words, and I kept saying to him, okay, so it's letters from people who hate me, and I just want a mouth. And he said, okay, and he sent me this. And I said, actually, Brian, even though you're the best designer I know, and we had a beautiful sexual thing in the late 90s, that is not what I meant. That is not projecting anger and violence and the kind of, you know, declamation that I was after. And he said, well, what about this? It's got a forked tongue. I said, no, it's still a baby with a mailbox for a mouth, and, you know. It didn't have the emotional valence that I was after, man. I was like, look, dude, I want his mouth like a volcano. These are people who cannot control their rage. And he said, okay, I think I got something. I said, we're getting there, we're getting there. It's still a little too clever. Okay, I get it, but it's clever. And that, I wanted the mouth to do it. So we eventually came up with this. I said, it's great, but how about some red, white, and blue colors? This is a book about America. He said, okay, we can do that. And then this is something that I really enjoy. Again, there are all these kind of cliches. They are cliches at this point about how books operate. So the way that a book operates is it always has, what do books have on the back? What do they have? Blurbs, that fucking bullshitty terrain of hyperbolic praise that everybody reads and just goes, oh, God, this is just, at least I do. I'm so sick of blurbs. They're such bullshit. At least in the case of my work, they're usually bullshit. And so I said to Brian, can we do something for the back of this book that really turns that on its head? Because I'd actually begged Algonquin years ago, when my second story collection came out, I said, could we just quote the people who hate my work the most? I would be so much more interested to read a book that is full of just this hateful rhetoric on the back. I'd be like, this has got to be interesting, right? And they was, of course, because they're like, no, what are you talking about? We're going to get Junot Diaz to blurb, whatever. They said, no, we're going to get blurbs, because that's the way they think. This is how you sell books. And I said, well, all right, but I filed it away, just like I filed away Brian's beautiful piece of art, and said, someday I'm going to get to do this like I want to do it. And so there they are. What they're saying about the author. Please commit suicide with a hammer or a nail gun. You're a disgraceful American. It would have been so nice if you had been a passenger in one of the planes that crashed in one of the World Trade Towers on 9/11/01. Now, so you're nothing but a lowly, cowardly insect. A lot of people in these letters, I'll read one of these letters at some point. See, you know what? All right, we're here. Well, you gutless pile of shit. Let's see. Dear asshole. You're a fucking idiot, and your daughter in the picture on your website looks like a maggot. You're a disgraceful American. It would have been so nice if you had been one of the passengers in one of the planes that crashed in one of the World Trade Towers on 9/11/01, signed Joseph Kelly. That's Joseph's letter. Dear Joseph, okay, you got me. My daughter does have kind of a maggoty look to her. For a while there, my wife and I were able to delude ourselves. I guess all parents do. We'd tell people her skin was alabaster or sometimes pearlescent. We thought it might be the kind of soap we were using. But I think in our heart of hearts, we knew something was wrong with her. Then came her first interaction with carrion. There was some kind of dead animal in our backyard. My wife says it was a rabbit, but I'm almost certain it was an opossum. Anyway, Josephine somehow got wind of it, and we found her out there burrowing into the thing's eye socket. The neighbors came out to watch. It was kind of awkward. I guess it would be sort of like if you, Joseph Kelly, found yourself talking to some buddies at a party and you said, you know that guy Steve Almond, I totally wish he'd been killed in the 9/11 attacks, and this voice behind you says, yeah, totally, we should have killed that filthy infidel Almond, and you turn around hoping to maybe give the guy a high five only to discover that it's Osama bin Laden. That is awkward. So that's what these letters are like. Thank you, I guess. Almond Joy, I would like to buy a copy of your book. The name of the person I'm buying this book for is Lick My Balls, You Fag. There it is. I'd like the inscription to say, I'm a fucking liberal coward. Dear, lick my balls, you fag. Thanks for your request. It is always inspiring to hear from readers. I'm curious about your name. It sounds Scottish. It goes on and on. Part of what's enjoyable about making these books is that you get to put in them what you want. You get to design the book you want that doesn't follow the standard rules of other kinds of books. And the book itself is not a static object. After reading this a few times, I treat the first copy as basically like a galley, and I read from them. And people would always say, why are people so angry at you? What did you write that made them so angry? Well, in the back, I added the small print, or what made them so mad anyway, which is all three of the pieces that people were reacting to. One was written, a couple for the Boston Globe and one for Salon. People also asked, did people respond to you? You know, did you send these letters? So I included an email exchange, newsflash for lefty slaves. That's awesome. And also put in a preamble, which I call a pre-ramble, which was an attempt to frame why I think these documents are important, the cultural function of putting a book like this into the world. The same thing is true even more so of This Won't Take But a Minute, Honey. I literally sent the book around to a bunch of friends of mine before I had any printed up, and they gave me some feedback that was helpful. But then readers gave me even more feedback, such as, I don't understand this one particular essay. So I went back, this is version 1.4. I went back and I rewrote that essay. I cut out a few stories that I didn't think were as strong and put other ones in. I put a section called Potentially Truthful Statements Regarding My Other Books, which was an effort to explain sort of how the publishing world feels for a writer. Some of these books were published, some of them never got published, because failure is a big part of the writing process. And I also was able to put in, people always ask me, well, what do you recommend? What books do you recommend? So there's the list. Those are the books I recommend. And because I'm a music freak and I had an extra page to play with, this is the other list. These are the albums that you should get, or that will make you much happier if you do get them. So does that belong in the middle of this book? I don't know. I say it does, and there's nobody to say no. And I think actually people like that as they're scrolling through this, they get a whole bunch of different weird things that might not fit together in a traditional book, that an editor would probably put the kibosh on. All right, so Letters from People Who Hate Me was really fun, and I really enjoyed making that. And I then was writing for this website called The Rumpus. I don't know if people know that website, but it's a literary website, and I wrote a column for them for a while called Bad Poetry. And it was basically, I would take one of my bad poems, written not when I was 16 or 26, but when I was actually like 36, and already had an MFA and a book in the world, and I would sit around for a full year. I quit writing prose, and I just wrote incredibly shitty poetry. Like, you're laughing, but if I read you one of these poems, you'd be like, yeah, that is shitty. That is terrible. But here's the thing about why I wrote that column. Most of what you write is terrible. That's how you stop writing terrible stuff. There is a significant part of becoming a writer or a critic is just writing, outlasting your doubt. That's a lot of it. And outlasting your own failure. And so bad poetry was an attempt to say, here's the worst shit I've ever written. And behind every bad piece of criticism you write, every bad piece of poetry or essay is a real experience you just weren't ready to write about yet. At least for poems, I think that's true. And so that's what bad poetry was. The terrible poem with a discussion of why it was so terrible, and mostly a discussion of what was really happening in my life when I was writing that horrible poem, what I was really not ready to write about yet. So Brian immediately came up with this beautiful image that's obviously, I mean, it's he just sent it to me, and he's like, this is what I have in mind. And I was like, yes, you are perfect. I know why we slept together now. He also had this idea of having the blurbs on the back. This is just a sketch. I mean, we exchanged a lot of sketches and stuff, and I thought that was just so smart and beautiful. This is the print he sent. I just thought it was so gorgeous. His dad actually did the sketch itself. He's an artist, and then Brian did the background. And I just thought, he just said, I just want to capture a winter vibe. This is how you feel when you have to look at your bad poems. That's it. That's it. That is the visual representation of artistic failure. Beautiful, bad poetry, right there. And then the image that he had for the back, amazing. And the blurbs again, painful failures. I got my friend Matthew Zapruder, who's an amazing poet, to write the introduction to the book and to allow me to include my favorite poem of his. And in the very back is a space, your bad poem here. It's like a little space. you know, you can do these things because nobody can tell you you can't. It doesn't mean every idea I had was great. Many of them were terrible. The clock and the skull eye, that was a terrible idea. But at least you get to try and experiment, and you get to view the book not as a static object that exists in one form across time, but as an evolving object, one that can change in various ways. Okay, so we're not there yet. A while ago, I write a lot of stories that run on nerve.com and places that are just filthy. And I wanted to, I was talking with Brian, I said, you know, Brian, you're so good at beautiful erotic images, and I have all these stories that are really very, you know, they're sexually charged, but they're really about people making bad decisions with their bodies, I would say. And they're about how painful and confusing sex is. I write about it a lot because I think it's when we're at our most human. We're just full of terror and hope and doubt and embarrassment and you know, joy and all the feelings that we tend to sort of button up. You know, I'm interested in writing stories that are about sex because you're emotionally and psychologically naked when that's happening. You just are. If it's you alone or you with a whole bunch of people, whatever it is, you're terrified in a way that's inherently artistic and literary. So I wanted to do these books, and I was wandering through, I figured I'd do a series of them because I have all these stories, and I was wandering through the airport in Alaska, of all places, and I found this religious text. It's called Ultimate Questions. I really recommend it. The answer to all these ultimate questions, surprisingly, is God. But what's important is that I was just absolutely in a state of wonder about the size of the book. It felt so good in my hand. And I just immediately knew I want to do these little erotica stories in single volumes. And then I was working on a jigsaw puzzle with my daughter, and I realized she was, you know, such a state of wonder when a puzzle comes together. And I thought to myself, well, what I want is for Brian to do a big, crazy, chaotic, sexually charged scene like he does, an erotic scene, but I want it to be like a puzzle. I want the volumes to together make a single image. So this is the first thing he sent me. And, you know, it's tough when you don't, like, Brian's doing this work for very little money. He's got the New York Times and the New Yorker and big, huge Time magazine and all these big magazines and book publishers on the other line. It's very hard to get a window of his time. So whenever I have anything less than an effusive reaction, I'm always kind of terrified. But I just was like, dude, this is just too porny. It's too hetero, it's too white, it's too porny. That's not what's in the stories. And it's not emotional enough. It's just parts. I said it very nicely, but that's what I had to say. And he said, well, okay. And I said, look, let's take some images from the stories. There's all this weird, perverse stuff happening in the stories. It's not just straight hetero sex. It's a lot of weird, interesting stuff happening, homosexual sex, sex with a whole, whatever. There's lots of different flavors in the book. And that's because the varieties of human perversity are infinite, and they should be. They're a blessing. So I said, you know, here are some ideas that I had to maybe make the image more particular, less generic, less porny, more emotional. So he sent me the sketch. I said, I like some of it, but some of it is not sexy, and I really want this to be sexy. And the guy with the ball gag, I mean, I know that's sexy for somebody, but it wasn't working for me, and why is he jerking off that? That just doesn't, that's not giving anyone any pleasure. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense. To me, again, so I hope I'm not offending anyone's sexual sensibilities here. That's purely just, I was like, that's not really sexy to me. But there's some elements of that, and we went back and forth with various different emails and refinements, and he got kind of impatient, and I was very apologetic, but I knew that he could do something that would really kill. And so we kept working on it. And he finally came up with this image, which I thought was okay. Again, the important thing is that the breaks in the book create a sense of mystery, so that I needed the breaks to be, who how does this fit together? I needed the images to, on their own, be arresting visually, but they also had to break in a place that created a sense of mystery. Something that I'd never thought about before, and neither had Brian. Like, how do you make 6 books that end up making one image? So I love this guy's butt, because it's like so weirdly not a real butt. Isn't that weird? But we have all these great email discussions that were just so crazy and filthy. Like, I really want to see her dildo. And he's like, well, do you want penetration? We just went back and forth. And what do we do next here? I just want to show you some of the detail, because the way he does, you don't see it necessarily just, but every image, they're so rich because he really layers the colors so beautifully. And I wanted a sense, I said, Brian, I really like that, but I want a sense that there's other stuff going on, and we're just getting one view. There's more happening in that frame. And he said, yeah, and we tossed around a bunch of ideas. We finally came up with, and he also sent me a different color scheme, which I liked a lot more. It's a little bit less, I don't know, there was a sense of something backlit happening, and something, I don't know, you guys might have better language for it, but it felt to me somehow both more subtle but also more evocative and less direct. I wanted them called, originally they were going to be called Pocket Perversions. That felt sort of prurient. And he said, well, I want to go with a Gothic typeface. I said, well, let's call them Writs. Let's call them Writs of Passion. So that's what we did. The Nasty Kind Always Are is the first one. Then there's 2 in this one. And all the way through. And that's the final image. We added the hand, the foot, this guy over here, this figure. And you never know how it's going to work out. We've been spending basically 3 months trying to figure this out. And yesterday arrived to my apartment these little firecrackers. And please come take a look at them. Take a look at them out on the table. I could not be more delighted with how they worked out. I mean, you never know when it's the actual object versus just talking about it. But I mean, they just worked. They just worked so well. So that's it. And if you turn it over, you can take a look at them out there. And if you turn them over, no words, just the image. I thought to myself, well, god damn, man. I don't know why, and it's not everybody's sensibility, but I just thought, why are books all the same size? I'm so tired of that. And especially because the book as an artifact is really in decline. The thing that you guys carry around and consult and have a kind of relationship with is devices. And I get it. I have a cell phone. I get it. I have a computer. I'm on it too much. But part of the purpose of these books, and part of the reason they're not available electronically, and part of the reason they're the size and shape they are, is they are an effort to say, actually, this is a remarkable artifact with its one lousy app called ReadMe. Art is what happens when your mind is arrested in the midst of distraction, and when you have the possibility of going someplace else and surfing another narrative. You're just not in it in the way that you are when you have a book. And especially when you have a book that you really have to get your face up close to. I realize that they're inconvenient in some ways, but I want people to see these objects and go, oh yeah, books. And not just religious pamphlets, but books can take all kinds of different forms and give a certain kind of pleasure that I feel like a device can't. In a device, I feel like I'm always one step away from a narcissistic interaction. With a book, I feel like I'm immersed in a story that I hope will take me away from myself. At any rate, those just arrived at my house yesterday, and I wanted to make sure they were available for this talk because I know you guys think a lot about design, and that's kind of for me, the thing I'm very excited about is having made this little project. Okay, so ends my formal remarks. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'll read. So included in these is a story called Jesus Loves You. It's about Jesus and all of his sexual picadillos, but I wanted to include a manifesto, which is called Why I Write Smut, and also the How to Write Sex Scenes, the 12-step program. So maybe I'll read some of those. Okay. Step 1, never compare a woman's nipples to A, cherries, B, cherry pits, C, pencil erasers, D, Frankenstein's bolts. Nipples are tricky. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and shades. They do not, as a rule, look like much of anything aside from nipples. So resist making dumb shit comparisons. I'm guilty of the last of those, by the way. Let's see. Resist the temptation to use genital euphemisms unless you're trying to be funny. No tunnel of love, candy shop, secret garden, pleasure gate. Equally no flesh kebab, man meat, tube steak, magic wand. Especially no hairy taco, sperm puppet. I could go on, but only for my own amusement. Step 4, then again, sometimes sex is funny, and if you ever saw a videotape of yourself in action, you'd agree. What an absurd arrangement. Don't be afraid to portray these comic aspects. If one of your characters in a dire moment of passion hits a note that sounds eerily like Celine Dion, duly note this. If another can't stay hard, allow him to use a ponytail holder for an improvised cock ring, and later on, if his daughter comes home and picks up this ponytail holder from his bedside table and starts absently chewing at the thing, well, so be it. Real people do not talk in porn cliches. They do not say, give it to me, big boy. They do not say, suck it, baby, that's right, all the way down. They do not say, yes, deeper, harder, deeper, oh, baby, oh, Christ, yes! At least they do not say these things to me. Most of the time, real people say all kinds of weird, funny things during sex, such as, I think I'm losing circulation, and I've got a cramp in my foot, and oh, sorry, and did you come already? God damn it. And it goes on and on. I'll just read the last one, which is step 12. If you ain't prepared to rock, don't roll. If you don't feel comfortable writing about sex, then don't. By this, I mean writing about sex as it actually exists in the real world as an ecstatic, terrifying, and above all, deeply emotional process. Real sex is compelling to read about because the participants are so utterly vulnerable. When the time comes to get naked, we are all terribly excited and frightened and hopeful and doubtful, usually at the same time. You mustn't abandon your characters in their time of need. You mustn't make of them naked playthings with rubbery parts. You must love them wholly and without shame as they go about their human calling, because we've already got a name for sex without the emotional content. It's called pornography. So, okay, all right, I'll take it. But mostly the stories are just stories that are about trying to write about the emotional content of sort of what's in sex. And I think that your publishing experience in your life, if you want to publish, you do, to the extent that your patience and talent allows, get to choose that experience. I would not choose to try to self-publish a big novel. If I ever get off my ass and write a big novel that's worth publishing, I will not try to publish it myself. I will not schlep it around in rubber bands and plastic sacks. I will partner with a corporation and, we'll put it into the world that way. But when you're putting a smaller, more personal, idiosyncratic project into the world, you get to choose at this point in history, in this part of the world, you get to choose to some extent the kind of publishing experience that you want. It does mean that these books will probably have a very small circulation, but you know what? That's fine. If I sell 17 of these books total, I will be disappointed, but I'll be okay with it. The joy was making them, working with Brian and creating the exact visual artifact and literary artifact that I had in mind when I started. There's a real sense of, okay, any of these that move out into the world is kind of gravy. So that's not true of every publishing experience I have. When I was publishing books with Random House, I had a very serious idea that I had to sell lots of copies or I was going to be an economic disappointment. I don't feel that way with this. I feel like these books will reach the people that they need to reach, and that's enough. So, okay, sure.
Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
You want to just take a seat over here, and we'll take some questions. That was great. So, okay, just a clarification first, really, which is you had this phrase which you mentioned kind of in passing, which I thought was just really fascinating, about the book being something, an object that evolves over time.
Yes.
And that's just that, I would like you to speak some more to that. But surely in the face of that very sort of generous view of it and a technologically sort of optimistic view of the book, you're kind of arresting its development somehow, or your enjoyment of this process seems to fly in the face of that statement somewhat. Could you elaborate on that?
So I'm arresting its development how?
Oh, just the fact that you're sort of going back to this super basic form of the book.
Yeah.
You see the book as something that's evolving technologically over time.
Right.
It's gone way past this point.
Do I need the mic?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, yeah. So, yes, I have an agenda. The agenda is I believe in reading. I believe that reading is done most effectively with an object. You arrest your attention, you focus on it, you are with those characters in that fictional or non-fictional world. And I feel that I understand that this makes me grandpa, which technology basically does to everybody. And I'm not speaking against people. Anybody who reads a book, anybody who can find one of my books electronically, great. I'm happy to have that reader. But I believe in the book as a cultural artifact. I think it is an almost perfect device. It doesn't need any fucking bells and whistles. It doesn't need a video game pop-out. It doesn't need, it can have those things, but why? Anna Karenina is beautiful because it's a story about how families break apart in the face of betrayal. It's gorgeous. It is, that paperback book, which weighs probably, 7 ounces, if you were stuck alone on a desert island, whatever a desert island is, because it's in a desert, but it's an island, whatever, you're stuck on an island. That, I believe, would keep you from going crazy for years. I don't know if a computer would do that. I think a handheld device would make you go crazier and crazier and crazy as you got sucked further into this vaporous world of kind of looking away from your internal life and looking out into the haze of your own narcissistic needs and distractions and fears. That's just how I feel. That's my agenda. And it's true that I am arresting the book's development, but I didn't think that there was anything wrong with the book to begin with. I didn't feel it needed to be developed. I think books, and I realize that I'm invested in this, but I feel like, The Catcher in the Rye is a perfect object. I want to be able to, the beauty of a book that makes it unlike the dominant visual artifacts in our culture is that in a book, the author only has words, this symbolic code, and the reader has to make the movie, and the soundtrack, and the lighting, and the timing, and the dialogue, and how the characters sound, and what they look like. And that is remarkable. It's too easy. I mean, look, I think TV and movies are amazing. I'm dazzled by them. But I think there's something special that happens when you have to collaborate in the creation of this world through your imagination. And a big part of what happens is that your moral imagination is enlarged. And I feel like our devices create a lot of convenience, but they also, I'm speaking personally, they create a lot of distraction. They get me away from being in the moment. When I was coming, I took a bus down, and I'm on the bus, and I was reading a book, and I looked up, and within a minute and a half of being on this bus, everybody was on the other bus. It feels to me like the culture is already saying, hey man, look at all these new devices and get your Apple crack, and the culture is speaking in one voice against me, but I feel like, hey, books are perfect artifacts. They're incredibly efficient, compressed, beautiful, poetic, precise little bursts of consciousness and created worlds, as long as the reader is willing to arrest their attention and invest in them. And I want to be somebody who is pushing that agenda rather than saying, yeah, man, I gotta get all my platforms going. But yes, I am arresting the progress of the book. That is me doing that.
Go ahead. One possible loss I could see in your decision, this project, is what can happen sometimes is the really fantastic relationship you can have with an editor.
Yes.
It sounds like that wasn't enough of a pull for you, but can you see that would be a loss?
Yeah, oh, definitely. And I actually didn't go through. Valero Duval is the designer who did the cover for God Bless America, which is the book I did, just the last book of stories. And I went with that small publishing company because the editor, Ben George, was phenomenal. He's an amazing editor. And I think when you do work with the one unassailably beautiful, amazing thing you get out of a relationship with a publisher is another set of eyes to look, who understands what you're trying to do and is on your side, but also sees some of the false moves that you don't, some of the excess and the ornamentation. And that's an incredible gift. And Ben George made that book way better. With these projects, I basically used my friends as my editors. I sent out the manuscript to a whole bunch of my friends who were all writer geeks, and I said, hey, I'm going to make one of my little crazy books again. Will you please read over this material? And they did give me a lot of feedback. I guess the disadvantage of making books yourself, doing the DIY route, is you do not have a filter. You don't have somebody who can say, actually, that clock is not working. Or that essay, when you're trying to clarify why the narrator has disappeared in modern fiction, what it has to do with sort of visual art being the dominant medium, that's not clear to me. I know you've got a point to make, but you're not making it clear to me. So I don't want to argue against the vital role of editors, but with these books, I use my friends basically.
That's great. I have a last question before we open up, and it's just another thing you said in passing, which was just so incredible. This idea of outlasting your doubt and fear, and it just seems in so much of your work, you take this incredibly contrary position, often really putting yourself out there. I mean, you didn't mention it, but quitting your job on one occasion.
Yeah.
Do you want to just quickly mention what happened there?
Well, I was an adjunct professor at BC. Adjunct professors it's not a real job. I mean, you know.
Well, writing a letter, yeah.
So, but Boston College invited Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State, to be their commencement speaker, and I, in a huff, wrote a letter to the Boston Globe, or as an open letter to the president of the university, never thinking that it was going to get published in the Boston Globe because they're fairly conservative, I just didn't think they would do it. And they did, and it went viral, and people went nuts. But I'm much happier to, I feel like part of your job as a writer, and maybe this is true of designers as well, like Brian is obviously willing to try whatever, is you just have to, at a certain point, just get tired of not being absolutely truthful, especially about things that are shameful. So that's more like, you just get tired of it. It's not like courage, it's more like you just get bored. Your heart gets bored with your mind. You go, so try something different.
Because it's something we face as critics, that what I'm interested in saying is whether that's something that's sort of constitutional, that the bravery involved in sticking your neck out there and making a statement. Or is it something you can study and work at and build up?
Well, one of the central essays in this won't take but a minute, the first one, in fact, the first couple of them, basically say, well, look, so here are the two forces that impinge on you as a writer, anybody trying to create. One is the sense that you were born to do this, you have this urgent mission, it's like your words are like scripture, you've got to get it out there, and that's a great feeling to have. It generates a lot of work. Most of that work is not great in the clear light of day, but that's all right, you're writing. The other feeling state that you have is one of self-loathing and doubt, in the sense that it's never going to get out there. There's a zillion people who are started younger than you, have more talent than you. What's the point? You're just going to make your parents depressed. Not that I think my parents. But so you need something that allows you to judge your decisions without second guessing your talent, without succumbing to the opera of self-doubt. And the only thing that actually does that is developing a critical faculty. And the only way that I feel that you develop a critical faculty is by looking at the work of people who are your peers. Because published authors have edited all their bad decisions out of their work. That's why they're published. You can get inspired, you can love their dance moves and imitate their work, but that's just going to give you a certain kind of excitement about it. The only way that you really learn is by constructively criticizing other people's mistakes that you can see. And the reason you can see them is because you make them in your own work. But you're blind to them because you've got to believe that you're working on something great to keep at the keyboard. For me anyway, it's just boring and doubt choking enough to do any sort of writing that you have to kind of have this narcissistic self-belief. The way that I got better in grad school wasn't by pooping out my awful stories. Those were just going to fail in their own quiet way. And it wasn't by reading authors who I loved, although that kept me invested. It was by reading the work of the people at my proximate level and identifying very patiently and very constructively, not in a mean way, not to try to earn points from the teacher, but literally to explain to myself, this is why you don't need all three of those adjectival modifiers. This is why this subplot is going nowhere. This is why you've built this beautiful ramp to this important scene with a lot at stakes and you try to finish it in 2 lines. I said that to people so much that I eventually started to inculcate that advice and not make those mistakes in the first draft. It doesn't mean I was suddenly writing amazing stuff, but I just stopped making the obvious mistakes. I really feel that's how it works. The irony of that is that as you develop a stronger critical faculty, you look at your own work and it seems like it's shit. And that means you're actually making progress. Right? As your critical faculty gets stronger, it surpasses your actual level of prose writing. And you're in this awkward state. You're like, why does everything I write suck? Well, you're becoming better. You're holding yourself to a higher standard. And that's what I mean about outlasting the crowd.
That's going to be our new motto. Okay. Let's open up some questions from the first. This is Anne-Marie.
Where do you sell your books? And has it moved from a hobby to something that is financially sustainable?
No, well, so where do I sell those?
Yeah.
I sell them in person. I only sell them when I'm teaching or doing an event, or reading, or teaching at a conference, or giving lectures and everything. So that's, now Harvard Bookstore sells, they don't sell the little crazy sex ones, but they sell the other 3 online. But that's it. And I sort of let people know, I schlep them around, that's it. Is it sustainable? No. And it's not really intended to be. When you're thinking about doing publishing, you have to do a self-inventory and say, with this particular project, what do I want out of it? When I signed with Random House, what I wanted was the money that would help me buy the house for my wife and soon-to-be child. And that was part of my motive. They offered some money. I said, okay, well, let's do this thing. And also the possibility that they would put their resources towards getting to work into the world. With this set of projects, it's much more small scale. I really just want to make cool books with my friend Brian. And I would love it if if some get sold, he gets a little bit of money, I get a little bit of money, some of the money goes to Doctors Without Borders. But we give to that charity anyway. I just realized at a certain point, well, I'll probably sell more of these books if I say that I take the money from that, we give that money anyway. This allows us to do that. This is sort of, my wife can say, okay, right, that makes sense to put that pile of money over there. But it's not, I don't do this to make a profit. I mean, I'm happy if it does make a little profit because I work hard on them, but this is more, it's evangelical. This is me reading my little books.
Linda, hi. You talked a little bit about how to get better by reading your peers' work.
Yes.
How do you get started? Like when you're sitting there facing the blank page.
Many times I don't get started. So, a lot of the time that I spend, I'll spend 14 hours that I could potentially be writing and be really writing something for 2 or 3. Sorry. Once I get going, I can write fairly quickly if I'm invested. But the main thing that I've tried to do is just to write about things that I'm obsessed with. I find it so onerous to actually have to sit alone in a room with all your doubts and anxieties and all the stuff that brought you to the keyboard, but you're also terrified of it. And for instance, somebody said, somebody read God Bless America and said, God, what's with all these stories about unhappy mothers with horrible sons? Yeah, well, what's about my fucking mother and me and my guilt? That's what that book is about. I had no idea, but I did know that the story is tilted in that direction. So even when you're excited to work on something, in some ways, it's charged with a certain ambivalence because, at least in literary work, part of your job is to traffic in unbearable feelings, in your own unbearable feelings. So there's a lot of internal resistance to, for me anyway, to writing. And the only thing that I've been able to do over the years is just try to write as much as I can about stuff that I really genuinely can call by. And, so that's why these projects come into the world, not because anybody's clamoring for another little crazy Steve Almond DIY book, but because I'm interested in writing. The things I write about are always things that I'm obsessed with, whether it's sex, or candy, or Kurt Vonnegut, or politics, or sports, or, that's just what I do, because I find that otherwise if you're not obsessed, if you're not urgent about it, why is the reader anymore? So that's the only hint I can give you, is to try to write things that you feel deeply invested in, even though that's fraught in its own.
I'm just wondering how, what your thoughts about this kind of form of publishing, and whether or not it's maybe the next evolution of people publishing zines, that kind of.
Yeah, well, zines were an early version of this idea that they were probably going to go out to a few hundred people, that they were handmade, that there wasn't a corporation mixed up in it. And that lent them, to me anyway, a certain kind of poignancy. You knew that a human being made it. That's very exciting in a world in which the corporations are basically shitting out the same stuff. Sbarro, The Gap, Budweiser, That's part of the reason I feel like people have lost the sense of being from somewhere, because the means of production have drifted into some huge industrial combine. We're just all buying the same shit. And none of it feels personal or authentic. And we know it. It's kind of eating away at us spiritually. But that stuff is also really compelling because it's kind of empty calories. It tastes yummy. It doesn't get you very far, but it's got lots of sugar. I wanted to say one more thing about process, just because I think you were asking a question about process. And that is, you need to do a self-inventory and decide not just what topics am I most compelled by, but when in the day do I write the best? Are you a nocturnal person? Are you a morning person? Do you write best in short bursts or long periods of time listening to music? What kind of music? In what sort of mood do you write the best stuff? Just look at the best thing you wrote and try to, for the best few things you've written, and try to actually remember what the circumstances were when you produced that work and replicate them. I know that seems odd, but everybody has their own diurnal, their own kind of internal clock, when they concentrate best. I write the best in the morning. I don't know why. Fresh from dream, which are kind of, you're telling yourself these stories subconsciously, and also because I'm just guilt-ridden until I get my writing done. So, but everybody has their own process, and you should do some thinking about when you do this. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, so I'm interested as far as when you're coming up with the content, at what point do you begin thinking about the form of the book? Because it seems like you're very interested in things about the size and the exterior, and obviously there's a relationship between you and Brian as far as going back and forth and building that. But at any point do you kind of write something like, oh, I already know what size this is going to be, I already know how I want it to respond to the page or respond to the form, or do you have a thing that's already written and then you're like, okay, now that's
Yes, it's the other way.
Okay.
For me, I because it's a design criticism course, I spoke much more about the design than I ever have. When I generally talk about these books, I say, gee, for 10 years after my MFA, I kept thinking, boy, I wish there was a book in the world that talked about the stuff that people really struggle with the keyboard, not point of view and craft and all that fun
and safe technical stuff, and emotional and psychological stuff that actually comes up when you're trying to do creative work. I thought about that for a decade, and much of what I have to say when I teach is sort of what was in this book. And I've also been writing shorts for years and years and years, knowing nobody publishes shorts. There's just an absolutely commercially, there's nobody who's ever going to buy a book of shorts, certainly not my team. So it was much more me saying, I really believe in this work and want to put it into the world, and then thinking, but really, because I think my original thinking with that was, I'm interested in craft books, but I always feel like if there's a craft book, how do I know that Strunk and White actually could write it all? Like I always feel like I want the craft book to have, you know what I mean? For the author to kind of be like, yeah, and here's my shit. So if you think it's good, like trust me on this. And if it sucks, then don't buy this book, because I obviously don't know what I'm talking about. So I had that idea of putting a craft book and a creative book together for a while, and it was really Brian sending me that image. I did know that I wanted it to be a certain size, again, because I published 6 books that were all the same size. And you can't put them in your pocket, and they're heavy and they're bulky, and I do understand why people find books onerous when they have these little whiz-bangs that they can carry around. I get that. And I feel like, well, there's solutions to that. And also that people feel, oddly enough, intimidated by books. Anna Karenina is a long book with a lot of Russian names to memorize. I get it. So I think I felt like, my ideal reader is somebody who's not a regular reader, but they might be enticed into reading by these little books. I wanted to treat the books as sort of gateway drugs. So all that stuff was spinning around in my head, not just the form that it would take. But since we're talking, since you guys are talking, think a lot about design, I do too, to the extent that, I don't have any technical names for it, but I just know that different size books are pleasing to me because they're more, to me, more useful and interesting as objects.
Oh yeah.
How much does the content depend on the cover, the package design? Do you design content kits?
No. And by the way, just so you know, I find content to be a creepy word. Just so you know that when I'm hearing that word, I get that it's a word that's used in design, but I just find it creepy. I don't think of any of these as having content. I think of them as having prose inside of them, and some really bad poetry. I'll read a bad poem.
All right.
That'll be our coda. And so these stories that are in the new books and all these letters and all that stuff was all written. And I was really looking for the vessel to pour them into. I wasn't saying, oh, there's this beautiful vessel, what can I pour into that? It's just, as a writer, that's the way I think. I think what interesting material might I want to have, be able to put into the world, and now that the means of production are available to me, and I have this amazing collaborator who will work with me and create these beautiful images, the range of books that I can put into the world has expanded. I said to my wife when I was thinking about doing this, she's having to listen to all my fucking whinging about everything. I said, I really have this idea that I want to self-publish, and she just said, oh God. Because you can tell, the downside of the self-publishing arrangement is you're doing everything. I mean, I've gone through life for the first 10 years of my career, hating each one of my publishers more, and I finally said, well, I can find the publisher I'll hate more than any other publisher, me. My wife, I think, knew this, that there was going to be a special kind of hell that I was going to And on the other hand, there's something very liberating about saying, well, I come at this mostly as a writer, but I also do think a lot about books and their role in the culture at large. And I want to have my own little say about that is proselytizing for the book. And I recognize that putting out just another book that looks like every other book is much less likely to get people to think about reading as something that's a good use of their time, a really important use of their time on earth.
All right.
One more question.
Okay.
Since you developed this relationship with Brian, have you ever thought about working kind of in reverse, where he developed an image and then you develop in response to that, as opposed to the traditional way of text than,
Yes, yes.
than image.
Well, you avoided content very well. But you said text, which is okay, it's better than content. And I make a joke about that, but it's by way of suggesting that the language of the corporation has really infiltrated. You know, we're living in a time where everything is fucking marketed to the nth degree, and data mined, and even the language that we use. You see this in the political arena all the time. You know, very cleverly turning citizens into taxpayers. Okay, even a little linguistic shift like that is huge. Oh yes, that's right, we're taxpayers. Government's a burden. And so I joke a little bit about text or content, but for me it's like, oh, those are stories, that's prose or whatever. There's a word that is sort of seems to be more clearly identifying it as the central endpoint, not the pretext for part of some larger project. The reason I don't ask Brian, because that's a great idea, but the reason I would never ask Brian to do that is he is so busy. I mean, you have no idea how many sweetly guilt-provoking emails and phone calls I made to him to get these books made. You honestly have not, probably 100. Just saying, you know, I have that thing coming up. Is there any way we can get, you know? He's so busy. So saying to him, hey, you know, Brian, would you make a whole new set of images when he's got, you know, major people that are paying him a lot of money for his talent and time and energy. I just feel like the best I can do is every couple of years to kind of tug on his sleeve and say, have some more weird shit. Would you be willing to?
Let's hear some weird shit.
Okay. So bad poetry. Let's see. Okay. They're all.
The best and the worst.
Well, I don't know. You know, well, this is really the worst. I think this might be the worst. Okay. I'm glad everybody's sitting because it's pretty heavy. It's called Hobo Champ, Lafayette, Louisiana, 1937. Written when I was like 36. So you guys, it seems to me, have a lot of time to fail before you're truly as shitty as me. Hobo Champ, Lafayette, Louisiana, 1937. Dem coals inside your chest. Dem coals is hot and white. Yes, that's me. D-E-M, dem. Like, I didn't just, that's me being a minstrel, you see it. You gotta change, so dem coals is hot and white. You gotta change your mac and cheese if you wanna be my wife. Dem fancy names for grief, Sean. That's Cajun. Don't come around here no more. No more. Them morning robes you won't wear won't fit in the shift robe. Okay, 36. How to book in the world and an MFA. So here's the essay. I won't read all of it. On behalf of all bad poets, I would like to formally accept the Nobel Prize for Literature. I do so with a sense of humility. Really, when you're writing this badly, it's almost religious. It's like God grabs you by the shoulders and says, listen up, Shar. I realize you're an upper-middle-class Caucasian Jew from suburban Northern California with almost no concept of true material deprivation. But I want you to write as if you were a poverty-stricken Negro haunting the ravaged hobo camps of Louisiana during the depths of the Depression. Don't worry about seeming like a racist idiot. I am God, and I have chosen you. And I say, geez, God, are you sure? I haven't been writing poetry that long. I'm not even really sure what versification is. But God is so persistent. He keeps saying, no, go for it, man. You're awesome. Anyway, it goes on and on. That's the sort of the gist of it.
All right, let's go drink wine, buy books, and talk more to Steve Almond. Thanks so much.